What's happening, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here, and I want to talk to you about a movie that I watched recently. The Producers, from either 1968 or 1969. I think it's 68, but I can't remember. And this movie stars Gene Wilder. Actually, Gene Wilder is sort of the secondary main character. He's not the absolute main character. And unfortunately, I didn't look this up before I started filming, but the main guy is someone else who I don't recognize from anything else. But this is a movie that you've probably heard of before. Basically, the premise is Gene Wilder is an accountant, and this other guy, he is a a play producer. He produces Broadway plays. And he finds out from Gene Wilder that if a play does terribly, then the producer could make off with a whole lot of money if they pretended like this play was going to do really well, but then it actually bombed. They could actually make a lot more money from a play that does terribly than they could from a really successful play. And so the rest of the movie is these two guys working together to make the worst play in the world so that they can come off with millions and millions of dollars from the people who thought that it was going to be a success. And that's basically it. I had never seen this movie in its entirety before. I had seen bits and pieces of it, which I thought were really funny, and then when I saw that it was on Netflix, I got really excited, because not only did the bits and pieces that I had seen before look really amusing to me, but I had heard lots of other people say that this movie was really fantastic, and so I looked forward to watching it. And you may be thinking, oh, he didn't like it, I wonder why. I liked it okay. It wasn't as great as I thought it would be. I think the big problem that I had with this movie is that in the 1960s, movies were paced very differently than they are today. And that may be a little bit of a scathing remark on how movies are done today. You look at some movies where the longest shot on average is like 0.5 seconds long, like it's a really go, 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 go kind of environment in making movies. They don't take a moment to breathe and slow down. And then in the 1960s, that was almost all they did. They breathed and they slowed down. There wasn't really a whole lot of fast-paced go, 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 go in making these movies. And I feel like there's nothing wrong with one direction or the other inherently. My problem mainly with this movie is that, A, there's not a lot of substance in this movie. Basically, once you get to the part where the two guys agree, okay, we're going to set out to make this really terrible film, once you get to that part, the rest of the movie is kind of slow. It's basically, okay, now we have to find a screenwriter, we have to find a director, and then they put on the play, and then there's the aftermath of that. And there's not a whole lot to this movie. It's basically a very simple premise that today could probably take about 20 minutes, and you'd be thinking, okay, there needs to be something else to make this a full-blown movie. And this movie is only an hour and a half long, but it sometimes feels a lot longer because some of the stuff that happens here is stretched out a lot longer than it needs to. Especially, there's this one part at the very beginning of the movie where something very funny is happening. One of the main characters is doing something that I was cracking up through the whole thing, but it was something that it could have happened for 1 minute of screen time, and I would have gotten the picture, and then the movie could have moved on to something else. But it keeps going on for about 3 or 4 minutes, and the point was hit home about 1 minute into the scene, but it kept going on for about 3 or 4 times that. And I feel like this movie kind of is that the whole way through. Sometimes a joke lands about a minute in, but then it keeps going and it keeps dragging it out because there's not a whole lot of substance to this movie. And also, back in the 1960s, I feel like that's just how things were done. Scenes went on a lot longer than they do now. And part of that might just be that they didn't have this adrenaline rush that we do today, where it's like, okay, we have to go, we have to go, we have to hit the next scene, we have to go fast, fast, fast. They didn't have that back then, but also I feel like that's kind of a problem when you have something like this where you start to lose your patience with the movie when you're like, okay, this is funny and all, but it was this funny 2 minutes ago. You could have cut out these 2 minutes and moved on to the next scene, and when you're starting to lose interest in a scene because it's going on way too long, that's kind of problematic. And this movie, I was noticing on Netflix, it's only 3.5 stars long, or 3.5 stars is the rating, and that's not a terrible rating out of 5. I was expecting it to be higher. When I first saw it, before I was watching the movie, I was thinking, that's a little low. This movie is like a cult classic. Everyone loves the producers. Why is this only 3.5 stars? Watching the movie, I could kind of see why. I can kind of see, okay, there's points in this movie that it really drags. It really needs to kind of pick up the pace and move on to the next scene, and it doesn't do that. And if it did do that, this movie would probably only be about an hour long, because there's not much of a plot there. And that's fine, because the plot that is there is really funny, but sometimes you're thinking, okay, this needs to either speed up, or there needs to be a little bit more plot added in. Something like, a love story for one of the characters to be involved in that kind of adds in some fluff, something that adds something to the movie so that we're not spending so much time on a scene that we already got it, we get it, we're good 2 minutes ago. But one thing that I did like about this movie, and it's not that I hated this movie, I did enjoy it, it was pretty funny, it just wasn't as great of a film as I expected it to be. But one thing that kind of intrigued me was that Gene Wilder is not the main character in this movie. He's one of the main characters, but this is before he kind of became leading man material. Now, I don't know anything about Gene Wilder, so for all I know, he was a leading man in something in like 65. I don't know. But here, you get the feeling that this movie kind of paved the way for successes later, like The Silver Streak, or Young Frankenstein, or Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You get the feeling that because of his turn here as kind of the second banana to the main character, that people were later like, yeah, let's get that guy from the producers to be in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or The Silver Streak, or Young Frankenstein. And Mel Brooks, who directed this movie, also directed Young Frankenstein. So you can definitely see that people were kind of sitting up and taking note of this young Gene Wilder guy and giving him bigger and bigger parts later on in the 70s, and even on up until later days after that. So it's interesting to see kind of a big star like Gene Wilder, who gets his start fairly young here. I mean, he looks very young here compared to later things that he was in. He gets his start, and then later on he gets bigger roles. All three of those other movies that I named, he was a much bigger character in those than he was in The Producers, where he does get some funny stuff to do, but he's never the main character in the movie. It's always the other guy, and I really wish that I could remember that guy's name, but he's someone I've never seen in anything else, so I just can't remember his name right off the top of my head. But that's basically all that I have to say about this movie. I did enjoy it a lot, but it wasn't quite as spectacularly funny as I expected it to be, based on what I had heard and what little of the movie I had seen in bits and pieces years ago. But I did enjoy it, and I do think if you're looking for something to watch on a Friday afternoon and you don't have anything, you can go on Netflix and you can watch this movie and you'll have a good time. Just keep your expectations reasonably reined in. Don't let them get too high, because then you might come away from it feeling kind of like I did. But that's all I have to say. I hope that you guys liked this review, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you guys later in the week and next week with some other videos. So take care. I'll see you later.